This war is often called the Forgotten War, but I wonder if that term is somewhat disingenuous, because people know what's going on in Sudan, and yet we don't see the kind of international humanitarian response to the crisis in Sudan like we see perhaps in a place like the Ukraine, where there's been an enormous response by countries like Canada, by countries across Europe, United States. It seems as if there isn't as much interest or concern about what's going on in Sudan. How do you explain the lack of engagement?
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the most frustrating aspects of this. There's a virtual, as you know, media blackout on what's happening in Sudan, despite the fact that it constitutes the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The international community has failed to fund the UN's response plan, right? The $4.6 billion that they estimate is needed to launch a robust aid response. I think only 23% of it has been funded. There have been no special visas for Sudanese refugees issued, right? In fact, Canada, I think, admitted about 300,000 Ukrainians when the war in Ukraine started. Less than 3,000 Sudanese have been admitted since the war in Sudan began, even though more people have been displaced by it.
Does the Canadian government explain, when members of Canada's Sudanese community have approached the Canadian government and asked why they are not letting more Sudanese in, people who are desperate for refuge, desperate for comfort and for safety, what does the Canadian government say?
Their response has been dismal and anti-Black. I just have to be frank about that. They don't care. I mean, I think as long as the non-Sudanese public, right, the vast majority of Canadians do not know about what's happening and are not out on the streets pushing their MPs to do something about it, the Canadian government doesn't see it in their interest to admit more Sudanese refugees. While at the same time, they invited a Sudanese delegation to the PDAC, the mining convention that happened, right? And so there's even a Canadian PR firm based in Montreal that had been advising the RSF after they committed the massacre in conjunction with the army in the sit-in after al-Bashir was ousted. That PR firm, headed by an ex-Israeli intelligence officer, by the way, has been supporting them to develop their PR strategy. And this is one of the reasons why you have some people talking about them as if they're going to be bringing democracy to Sudan when they're committing a genocide in Darfur, and had been, in 2003 as well. So it's really quite appalling, and I'm just disgusted by the Canadian response, to be honest. In some ways, I don't think that more coverage necessarily means better policy. We've seen that in relation to Gaza. There is better coverage, but the response has still been dismal. But I think that in the case of Sudan, if more people knew, I think there would be more mobilizing, and there would be more pressure on the Canadian government to open up a special visa program for refugees. There is a family reunification program that began, when the war started, that is allowing Sudanese Canadians to reunite with their family members, that has not been implemented. People have been waiting for 2 years. And meanwhile, some of their relatives have died in this war because the Canadian government has taken so long to process things, and they're not responding to people's requests for follow-up. The policy is deadly, is what I would say. And I really hope that anyone listening to this will feel inspired to call their MPs, their local politicians, and really pressure them to do something about this. I think that's the least we can do, is to allow people to reunite with their family members and to open up a more robust refugee program that is on par with what was done for Ukrainians.
You've been listening to a clip of In Bed with the Elephant with me, your host, Adrian Harewood. Be sure to check out the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast and write a review. We love hearing from you.